Well, hello, everybody. This is Jason Bloomberg from Intellyx. We see that a number of people are still joining, so we'll begin this webinar in about 1 minute. Well, that's probably enough time for everybody to join. So let's begin. Welcome to the webinar, Reimagining the Automation Playbook with our host, Robocorp. So on this webinar, we'll be discussing the evolution of the RPA, robotic process automation industry, its current state, and what our panelists expect to see in the future. So our panelists, we have Sebastian Toro. He is an AI veteran, speaker, and thought leader. He leads Cognizant's intelligent automation capabilities in the Nordics and Europe. And we have Antti Karjalainen, who is the CEO of Robocorp, an open source enthusiast with a background in software engineering. He is also a member of the board at the Robot Framework Foundation. And my name is Jason Bloomberg. I'm president of Intellyx, industry analyst firm focused broadly on enterprise digital transformation. So a few housekeeping notes. We're recording this webinar and we'll send a recording to all the attendees after it's complete. You can also ask questions in either the chat box or the Q&A. We try to figure out which one you should pick, and we figured that people would use the other one anyway. So either one is fine. And then we will answer questions about half an hour into the webinar. So let's begin. So RPA is a really hot topic these days. Bots seem to be everywhere, but there's a lot more going on as well. There are a lot of other categories of automation. There's intelligent process automation, digital process automation, hyper automation. It seems that there's no end of these different categories. So I'd like to ask the panelists, probably starting with Sebastian, sort of what is the difference between RPA and all these other categories, right? And what is the impact, right, in terms of the sorts of bots or scripts or digital assistants or whatever you want to call them? How are all of these different concepts related? So Sebastian, we'll start there and go from there.
Awesome, thank you. And yeah, I mean, this industry has really become a buzzword industry to a large extent. We kind of the term RPA was coined somewhere in 2011 and 2012, and that's kind of when it started off, and it was kind of a one type of platform and one type of solution. And I think that as RPA has matured, I think that it all kind of started with the realization that this is actually an ecosystem of different technologies kind of working in tandem to kind of deliver business outcome and business value. And then in that kind of space, you started talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning. You had chatbots coming up, and you kind of needed to find a way to kind of bring those different terminologies together and kind of have more of a discussion around what are the actual business drivers behind it. So I mean, if you look at it now, you have intelligent automation, you have intelligent process automation, you have hyper automation, digital process automation, and to a large extent, that's essentially the same kind of items residing behind those terms. It's kind of just different terminologies between different providers, different analyst firms, etc., to kind of position themselves in the market. But I think that it's the evolution of RPA has been from kind of a one siloed tech stack to kind of include a multitude of different technologies working in tandem to kind of create a business outcome and resolve an underlying issue for an organization. So that's kind of how I've seen those words evolving over time as well.
So Antti, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, as a software vendor, you know, we talk about RPA. Obviously, the term has many meanings. according to who's listening and who's talking. And sometimes I'm presenting to a potential client, and they're thinking, oh, you do RPA, but don't you have anything more intelligent to add there into the mix? And sure, yeah, we can integrate into any source of intelligence or decision making, whether that's natural language understanding or image recognition or handwriting recognition or what have you. It just all blends into the platform really seamlessly. Oh, but then you should call it intelligent process automation. And we are in this endless debate of what to call it. And I've started actually use just the word bots, like, short for software robots or robots. I think at the fundamental level, what it is about is the capability of being able to deploy a bot that has agency, that can act as a human user would on IT systems and perform tasks that people would do otherwise manually. So whether it has intelligence, whether it doesn't have, at the end of the day, it technically doesn't really matter. It's all about the fundamental capability. Now somebody will ask how a bot is different from a script. Now that's a good boundary to draw, I think, where you start acting with user credentials, start taking that agency and performing business processes end to end. Then you're talking about a bot rather than a script. But we can go in deeper into that rabbit hole if you want in this conversation.
Well, it's an interesting point that you bring up scripts, because, being one of the old guys on this webinar, probably the oldest guy on this webinar, I remember back in 1980s, we had macros and we could script interactions with our computers. This is actually before laptops, with these simple macros. And of course, Microsoft Excel still has macros built in, has for many years. And then in the 90s, there was a brief moment in time where software agents were the hot topic. You mentioned agency, right? Where you have a piece of software that in some way makes up its own mind to take action, right? It doesn't just respond to a user input, but it's doing something on its own, obviously based upon some sort of conditions in the environment, but it has that level of agency. Now we're talking about bots, and of course robots are sexy, right? So everybody loves robots because they're cool, and so we call them bots, but really in many ways they're just like the macros of old. But then you bring up this intelligence. So this is really sort of the key question, right? Because in the early days of RPA, which as Sebastian mentioned is already a handful of years ago, really there was nothing more to a bot than this simple sort of macro, like, interact with some user interface and click buttons and whatnot. And that was really all there was to it. But we're a number of years down the road, and there's a lot of maturity now. So like, what is the current state of the art, right? How intelligent can bots get? Are we really doing something more than a simple macro scripting some user interface? And sort of where are we headed with these things? Sebastian, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, no, but exactly. I mean, it's been an evolution here. I mean, when I built my first bot in 2012 or thereabout, I mean, if you change the screen resolution, everything crashed essentially. So it was really kind of chasing pixels on a screen to a large extent. And I mean, and with the advancement of kind of the adjacent technologies, OCR and kind of screen scraping, you've been able to build more robustness into the platform, and kind of that's been kind of the fundament that has really made RPA become as widely used. The stability of the scripts or the bots deployed have really come there. I mean, because I've spent time in Europe, I spent a couple of years in the US as well, and in the US there was also a lot of talk about AI, especially back in 2018 when I moved over, and kind of how RPA was part of the AI wave. And for me, kind of when I think about AI, then that kind of immediately draws my span to kind of the Hollywood movies. I'm thinking Skynet kind of AI, and I mean that's not really what we're where we're at. But I mean, we're adding capabilities to understand patterns in data to kind of come to a point where bots are now in a position to kind of make the next best action, if you so will. So if this fails, what should the logical next steps be? Based on larger data sets, you can also kind of have a hypothesis that if you can come to kind of 100% certainty that this is the path forward by combining underlying questions, each residing for like 10% of certainty, and in combination, all of a sudden you have 100% reliability. And so I mean, it's still kind of more analytics when we kind of talk about the intelligence of the bots at this stage, but at least kind of seeing and understanding what's happening in data, and of course understanding that data and kind of being able to capture the data as well, of course. I think that's kind of where we're at this stage, to really see the patterns and understand and logically follow steps that are hidden in the data and maybe not hard coded into a script as they were before, when we were chasing pixels.
Yeah, I kind of agree that the intelligence part is definitely adjacent to automation. Oftentimes we like to kind of talk about the bots as the sort of hands of AI, as you know, you'll have this one track of all sorts of companies developing amazing technology for image recognition, OCR, natural language understanding, all kinds of analytics. Then you have the practical reality of how you actually operationalize that. You look at your IT systems and you know, see that legacy from the 90s, and you look at all these science fiction looking technology and how you put that into work in your actual systems in practice. I think RPA can bridge that gap. You know, also starting from that you know, first wave, like really early stage RPA being only visual. Now we've seen with technologies like Robocorp, we are essentially you know, bringing to market a programmable RPA that can always find the best path to automate, whether that's through visual interaction, whether that's through you know, manipulating the UI you know, beyond the surface layer, or even going directly into the data. So bots can become really robust that way, kind of going beyond the visual layer interaction. And then directly AI relating to bots, you know, we have been experimenting with stuff that putting machine learning models, understanding computer interfaces, looking them from a human's perspective, and then just understanding the same way as humans do, and being able to interact with them. That's still a bit ways to go there before we are able to get that sort of stuff working reliably in production on broad set of applications. But that's definitely something that I see as kind of next steps in RPA as well.
So one of the interesting sort of conclusions you can derive from what you just said, Antti, is that RPA isn't necessarily a standalone product, right, where somebody just buys RPA and plugs it in, but is a component of perhaps a larger platform, maybe something that's more, you know, more different kinds of automation or AI-driven behavior, where RPA is part of the story. So, I mean, how do you see RPA fitting into this platform story, you know, as a software component or a supporting player in the space, as opposed to sort of a separate piece of technology?
Yeah, I think RPA and bots in general, they have the you know, really the position to bring together a lot of different technologies. And we are seeing this with some of our larger enterprise users, where they've gone through the first wave of RPA, seeing what bots can do, and then they realize, hey, there's all sorts of wonderful technologies around the broader automation space, starting from workflow automation, business process automation, all sorts of AI capabilities, chatbots, as Sebastian mentioned, and we can bring these together through bots, and the bots are going to be just one capability in our IT or systems tool belt that we can use there, but the bots can actually like bring all that capability together and cross the final mile from you know, to actually interact with your systems, where there previously wasn't a way to go there. Like the easy way is to say that, okay, start a custom project to build that integration, but you know, then you're going to be 3-4 years in, and you know, tens of millions of investment done, and it's still not there. So I think bots are like really practical way to get to like real results fast.
So Sebastian, as a service provider, it'd be good to sort of get your insight into the role service providers play with RPA. Is, you know, because it's more of this integrated story, right? There's different moving parts and it continues to evolve. It's not like you can just go in and sort of install RPA and then go home, right? There's more to it than that. So what are you seeing as a service provider, and what are you seeing sort of in the service provider market overall? Are the service providers generally providing good value to enterprises, or is there still sort of a gap there to be filled?
Oh, good questions. And I mean, it's I think that when RPA really hit off back in 2017, 2018, thereabout, when it really started to kind of resonate in the market and be implemented, it was generally seen as kind of a standalone. You did your proof of concept, you did your pilot, you established your center of excellence, and then you kept chasing automation, well, RPA candidates to automate essentially. And I mean that to a large extent also burnt a lot of early adopters on the client side. I mean, you were kind of trying to cherry pick from an unknown cake to some extent, and we saw quite a lot of early failures, and I think that's kind of drove the whole discussion that, hey, there might be additional things needed. I mean, it's not only other technologies, but it could actually be Lean Six Sigma consulting efforts, or maybe internal consultant or whatever, but kind of working with the processes before you actually automate them. And one big trend we've seen in the last couple of years is also that you kind of move away from looking at kind of an automatable task with RPA to kind of look at how can we create touchless accounts payable, for example? How can we have a no-touch process where everything is kind of just flowing through, and then we can have deviation handling going with the humans? And then, of course, when you start looking at it from more of a whole process holistic view, that of course mean you need a multitude of technologies throughout those different steps, and also to Antti's point earlier, that RPA is really the executioner, the one that kind of drives the process forward, the glue that kind of keeps these things together. And I had this was a client once that said that manual repetitive human work is just two failed integrations that are that still need to be performed. So I mean, it's you can almost see RPA as kind of an integration engine, kind of the integration engine of the future to some extent also. I think that moving more from kind of this task-oriented, quick win, find small pieces of work to automate quickly, to look at it more in a broader spectra, kind of bringing more technologies together, reimagining and re-engineering processes so that you can kind of take a larger chunk of the processes and automate them and ultimately derive better business outcome and better business value. And there was a second part to that question as well. Did I capture both?
Oh, I think that was a good answer. But Antti, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I was kind of listening to Sebastian and the early days of RPA really taking off. You know, I think it was really sold as this standalone tool. You just buy these licenses and deploy, and you're gonna be all set. You had this promise of citizen developers who build all these bots and even maintain them, who knows, and have them operate there and produce immense amount of value, and forming of shadow IT but I talking with a lot of customers, I really understand the need to have something like that, like the how compelling that story was. Just buy this product and you don't have to actually deal with IT, and you're gonna be able to get rid of your IT problems. Like that's compelling. That's like $35 billion worth of market capital compelling value prop. Unfortunately, it hasn't actually provided a lot of good results and outcomes. We've seen that the center of excellence type of approach has worked with larger organizations. Certainly, mid-market is not going to be able to just buy a bunch of licenses and deploy citizen developers and try to get results. That's probably not going to work there. COE has worked, and I think that kind of perspective as RPA as a driving integration engine is kind of an interesting take, Sebastian, where it kind of aligns to the way we are thinking about programmable RPA and these resilient bots that can integrate beyond the typical surface level automation.
Yes, so this is an interesting point. You each mentioned centers of excellence, and that sort of brings up the question, well, who in the organization should be building the bots? And what some of the RPA vendors are saying is, well, we're going to make this a low-code experience, opening up bot creation to citizen developers, right? Line of business personnel who aren't professional developers, who can now put together these bots. I mentioned that there's sort of an evolution of macros, and macros were really for anybody to build. It was a very simple thing to do. But there's only so much you can expect at that level, right? Because you don't really want a single bot to do a simple thing. We're talking about complex automations and how to deal with these complex enterprise automation scenarios where the RPA is part of the story. So who is actually building the bots? Who should build the bots? And can we ever expect these citizen developers to be responsible for driving the RPA initiatives in their organizations? So now, Sebastian, you want to try that one?
Yeah, I mean, the question on who should, then my short answer should be is actually everyone, but it needs to be inside a controlled and structured environment. Because I mean, if you kind of want to play the devil's advocate, what you do when you enable citizen development and kind of one bot per employee, you also give employees the opportunity to do an error, but 100 times faster. So I mean, so you also kind of to some extent risk of unleashing that into your organization as well. So I mean, there needs to be kind of some sort of framework and kind of control tower connected to this as well, to kind of owning the overall experience. Because I mean, if you talk to an IT organization, everyone is talking about their shadow IT. You have Excel macros running super critical processes in the background on a local computer for someone, and you barely know who the person is. I mean, this to some extent also has the opportunity to create that, but the beautiful thing with RPA is, of course, you can keep it connected centrally to in a completely different way. And also when we look at kind of the COE, I mean, there's different components when it comes to kind of running the automation agenda. I mean, where me as a service provider, and I mean, with my previous experience, there's kind of a value adding part of running an automation initiative, and there's kind of a maintenance component baked into it as well. So I mean, the real value is happening in the analysis part when you actually conduct these deep analysis of the processes and during the development, because then you're actually contributing and building something, and then you have this maintenance. I mean, for the value to keep coming time after time, you need to keep it up and running. But that's really not kind of the valuable part of the automation initiatives. I mean. But you still kind of need all these components for it to kind of deliver value over time. But it's but the short answer to the who should develop everyone, but you should kind of have different tracks depending on kind of the type of processes or the type of automations you're thinking about deploying, and of course keeping it inside a good framework to kind of not risk creating a new kind of shadow IT environment in your organization.
Antti, do you have something?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question to begin with, like who should automate. And, I think it's fundamentally not about low code per se, that question. It's my short answer that I wrote down here is who should automate, not IT. I've seen IT trying to push RPA, and that's like pushing with a rope. It's really hard to push these automations to line of business unless you have a really great relationship with them. Oftentimes that sadly isn't the case. IT can definitely support. I'm not saying that they're not going to have a role in that. Best scenario is that they are very supportive of RPA efforts. I think the line of business should definitely understand automation and the potential of what you can build with bots, but they don't necessarily need to build the bots themselves. Now they can, if you have, if you want to bring that capability in, certainly you can. But then we see more and more people buying the business outcome of a bot as a service from service providers, rather than building and maintaining and feeding and caring that themselves. They need to understand what kind of automation they want to bring in, what can be brought in, but whether they implement it in their own business organization, that's really debatable. It depends on the company situation. Now, I think low code, I think of that side of the story more on the implementation side. So on low code, I'm kind of like for low code in a way that people want to have easy tools to work with, easier tools to work with. They also have to have powerful tools as well. So low code as an aid to help people get started faster, that's good. That's more on the developer's journey. Now that we are talking about who should automate, it should be people inside the line of business who should understand what to automate.
So Sebastian, you brought up shadow IT, and clearly the shadow IT problem can be caused on the the building side of the equation, right? If lines of business go out and build things outside of the purview of IT, you can lead to issues. But with RPA, it's more likely to be the running of the bots, right, and the maintenance issues, right? Because one of the challenges with RPA is that the bots tend to be brittle, right? They don't do well with changes in the environment. And really, there's a lot of different things that can break a bot, right? It could be, you mentioned pixel pushing. It could be a change in the user interface, or a change in data formats, change in requirements, change in integration parameters, right? There's a whole lot of different things that can break the bots, which means that maintenance, right, keeping them up and running after they've been deployed is a big part of the RPA story. So sort of where do you see this fitting in to the overall value proposition? And really, how can organizations go into RPA with their eyes open about the maintenance challenge and still get sufficient value, even though they do have to continue to keep these things up and running?
I mean, if we look at kind of the citizen development, I mean, I generally use the terminology. You have digital workers that are kind of have their own user accounts, work separately, and then you have digital assistants that kind of work on your computer to kind of make your everyday life easier. And of course, the assistants are working on your computer under your supervision. You always see what's going on. So I mean, the maintenance is kind of given because you're essentially looking at your own script doing the work. It's like with an Excel macro essentially, and looking at it kind of in a broader picture with the whole maintenance mountain that we've been calling it for a couple of years. I mean, it's something that's been downplayed quite aggressively, especially early on, and that's kind of a hard lesson. I have some clients that ended up going with other vendors, and then they come back a year later, and they have their center of excellence, 5 developers, 1 RPA supervisor essentially in the background, and within a year they had 6 full-time people just kind of maintaining and making sure and updating the bots in production, and they only had like 27 scripts or something. So I mean, that's kind of using the construction industry as kind of a reference here. I mean, you need to make sure that the foundation is set and stable before you start building the walls, right? And I think that's it. You kind of see the shimmering light of the ROI, and that's kind of the story that us service providers. And also kind of the RPA vendors to a large extent has been driven, kind of talking about the ROI and the quick value realization, and then you kind of skip the fundamental parts of building a proper foundation, because I mean, looking at if you kind of take same RPA tool, same person does the same training for 2 different people in 2 different rooms, and then ask them to automate the exact same process and then swap scripts. It's going to take some time for them to understand what the other one built. I mean, there is quite a big flexibility in how you build script as well. So I think that's kind of having that foundation in place, to kind of not have to be reliant on one individual person, and then kind of also building into that robustness and having proper naming conventions that you always follow, and making sure that we have one standard way of building our bots. That of course then leads to a much easier maintenance part of the entire. Because I mean, analyzing and building the bot, that's less than 20% of the work. 80% of the kind of life cycle is in the maintenance, and that's really doing it properly in the beginning will make it much easier to kind of handle that over time as well.
Yeah, my sense is that the big RPA vendors have downplayed, I like this phrase, maintenance mountain, the 80-20, 80% maintenance. They've been downplaying it, and it's sort of come back to bite them a bit, because so much of the RPA investment that enterprises have to make is in this maintenance part of the story. But then I look at what Robocorp is doing, and they're sort of taking a different approach. They're saying, well, we're here to empower developers with technology that focuses not just on creating the bots, but really on the full life cycle of the bots. And that's a different approach, right? Instead of downplaying maintenance and saying, well, don't worry about the man behind the curtain. It's like, well, let's empower our developers to deal with this in a more agile way, right? A full life cycle, expecting change kind of approach, which is really the way modern software has to be done. So Antti, I'm interested in your sort of perspective. Is that how you see Robocorp playing, and sort of how did you end up taking this approach to RPA?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about automation ops, kind of relating it to DevOps, how we see the similarities. My background and some of the technical background that we bring into space is coming from test automation, and there people are running thousands and thousands of test scripts every single day, and the systems that they're testing are changing constantly. So they have rigorous process around maintaining that mass of tests and scripts and automations, and they're reusing a lot of code. So looking at RPA, figuring out that, okay, it seems that the COE-led model is the thing that's working. Okay, we have dedicated RPA developers building these automations. And if you're automating an end-to-end business process, like we are seeing great results for instance, in healthcare around revenue cycles, like that's fundamentally how these healthcare clinics are getting paid. You cannot interrupt that flow of work. So you better have your team ready to make sure that those bots are running, or your partners, your service providers team ready to make sure that you have an SLA on that bot. So it was just coming from the kind of fundamental realization where bots are working, what kind of work they're doing, and what learnings we can leverage from other industries who've been doing this much longer than we've been doing it in RPA. And coming back to how compelling that story would be if it would be true, that just buy these licenses, give them to your people, and they'll build the bots and don't worry about the maintenance. But applies only to that applies only to like trivial automations instead of actual end-to-end business processes that really can push the needle and change your whole business.
So let's get to some of the questions from our audience. There were a few questions sort of about this role of low code. I mentioned low code, and you talk to a community of professional developers, you often get a lot of pushback on the whole low code story. And one of our attendees is pointing out that low code's not really taking hold in their organization, but when it comes to RPA, Microsoft Power Apps is being used a lot because they have the Microsoft Office environment, and Microsoft makes it easy to build automations in that environment. And another attendee is also pointing out that SAP, sort of at the big end of things, is introducing automation or RPA capabilities, where Microsoft is sort of doing it from the bottom up, helping people automate their Office apps. So, sort of how do how do you two see sort of this squeeze from both sides, from the SAPs of the world and the big enterprise apps driving automation, and the Microsofts of the world and the Office apps driving automation? How do you see sort of RPA developing, whether it's the big RPA vendors and what they're doing, or what Robocorp is doing? So how do you see sort of this whole playing out?
Yeah, so on my side, we are definitely seeing a lot of verticalization of RPA is being integrated into a lot of software products. We basically see every large software platform acquiring RPA technologies and integrating that. But when we look at the use cases around RPA, sure, it's good if SAP is adding that capability into their product. It's been missing quite sorely from there. But when you look at the workloads that you want to automate across an enterprise, typically they go across multiple different platforms. Like if it would be all inside one platform, it would be an easy thing to solve anyway by the vendor. So I think bots are something that definitely will cross platforms and need to excel in multiple scenarios, not just with SAP specifically or some other software platform. So I see that there's still opportunity out there, plenty of that, for a specialized bot technology like Robocorp to exist, and there's a need for that as well. So and kind of interesting enough, we've seen a lot of these big software platforms take the acquisition path of adding RPA into their platform. So they'll acquire a technology. There's been a whole wave of RPA technology acquisitions, but not everyone is going to be able to do that, and there's not going to be enough technology to be acquired. So we actually envision with Robocorp that we can shift into a place where Robocorp can be integratable into, let's say, a healthcare platform or a ERP system directly, and use that way, where you'll have the benefit of integrated RPA coming with the platform, but it's not going to be just dedicated to that platform vendor alone.
Sebastian, anything to add?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, we've seen SAP, I think that's kind of the prime example, and they quite recently even bought a process mining companies. I mean, they are kind of adding automation capabilities to the stack. But I think you'll always have kind of the challenge with of course, having an RPA tool that is so tightly linked to one specific platform. I mean, you always had a fear that if I were to sit in an SAP environment now, and then I would have deployed 300 automations over the next 2 years, then all of a sudden we have an ERP upgrade and we want to go out to the market and see what ERP system fits us moving forward. I mean, you kind of have the lock-in effect as well, and I've actually had a couple of conversations on that, especially with SAP in this instance. So I think there's also a space where you don't want to be. I mean, you want to have the best of kind of the solutions you have, but you don't want to be too reliant on one specific vendor that you're unable to kind of move away from them if there's something else happening for your organization in the future as well. But yeah, no, but aside from that, I mean, it's you kind of have that top up approach with SAP. Salesforce has been in here doing stuff. I mean, even the kind of small local ERP providers that I see here in Scandinavia are investing in building RPA capabilities as well. So I mean, you really see that as a trend. And also like the Microsoft's kind of deploying it from a bottoms up approach, but there's definitely always going to be a place for the niche players, and I also think that it's going to be hard for the kind of big guys and with kind of a different core business to kind of keep up with the technological advancements on the market.
Yeah. To me, it just shows that there's a lot of customer side demand when these platforms are reacting to that. That's what's driving it. The customers are asking, "Hey, I want to build bots. I want to deploy bots. Like, do you have anything for that?" And they go out and acquire a technology and try to integrate it. Like, that's the reaction.
So a lot of this discussion is focused on individuals building bots to solve certain problems, but What about the other end of things? And we had a question from an attendee. What is the most complicated or challenging automation you've encountered? And I'll expand that a bit, sort of to say, what is the most complicated automation that RPA might ever be suitable for? That is, are there automation challenges enterprises might have that are just beyond RPA? Or can RPA really rise to any occasion?
Really hard question. I mean, I think it can rise to any occasion, but I don't think it needs a buddy to join it on the journey, essentially. RPA, when you hit those really complex things, you need a partner for the RPA tool to really perform. I think that's kind of the thing. But there's always going to be integrations needed, and there's always going to be execution and kind of the manual work of driving the process forward needed. So I mean, there's probably always going to be a space for RPA, but I don't necessarily think that RPA as kind of a lone tool is going to be the one solving it when you come to the really complex things. And then you also, of course, have kind of the challenge with the longer the script or the kind of the code for your bot, the more points in that script are open for kind of breaking. So you don't want to build one bot spanning too long of a process either. So I mean, it's I think that RPA can rise to any occasion, but it needs good companionship to do so.
Yeah, you definitely want to break it down to smaller chunks and more manageable pieces. Obviously, with a programmable RPA platform, you can definitely literally implement anything, but there's limits to where you want to go with that. You know, we see bots that have hundreds of business rules encoded in them. They might run 6 hours at a time, and that's completely fine. Like they are filling a valuable purpose, and they are the best way to solve that particular need. But you know, at some point you wanna maybe start building a dedicated software product for that need if it becomes too large.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I have another question here. Somebody's pointing out that even though RPA is a fast and modern automation tool, what this one person is seeing is that people are still using old waterfall methods with big teams rather than agile development. And I must say I've seen that as well. So, you know, I'd be interested to see if you're seeing that. But that's really the question, right? Would RPA be done better with more agile teams, you know, the two-pizza teams following agile approaches? And I guess another question is, does RPA drive organizations to do things that way? Or as this person thinks, maybe RPA is an excuse to go back to the bad waterfall habits of old. So what are you seeing, and what are you hoping to see in terms of the sort of these software approaches for these RPA efforts?
You want to go first, Antti, or I can go then. No, but I think that, I mean, it's organizational legacy essentially. How are we usually running our IT projects? I would always argue that you want to go for more an agile DevOps kind of approach. I mean, you don't build a bot, deploy it, and then kind of shed your hands and you're done with it. We kind of come back to the whole maintenance and continuous improvements of the bot as well. I mean, the SAP system that you just did the automation in will eventually have an upgrade or change in the interface or whatever it might be. So I mean, you kind of continuously need to improve and augment your bots. New technological advancements, new releases of the actual RPA tool that you deployed it with will of course lead to that as well. So I mean, that kind of agile mindset is what I've always premiered and kind of implemented. And of course, myself, I've been almost forced into waterfall models at some places as well. But I mean, it's more kind of a legacy. This is how we are set up, and then you kind of need to work. Then it also all of a sudden becomes kind of a change management approach as well, to kind of how should we actually do this? Is what we're trying to achieve with RPA the same as you're doing when you're working with the larger system in implementations, ERP upgrades or whatever it might be, or do you need something else to kind of make it work with this set of technologies? I think it happens, and I think it's more based on legacy than kind of a mature discussion around what is best suited for RPA.
Yeah, I mean, we are talking about automation ops specifically because we want to drive people's mindset away from waterfall methodology. I think RPA traditionally has approached implementation projects very waterfall oriented. It stems from we have already this jargon in the industry. We write up the PDD, then we roll it up to the COE, and it's the kind of the mold that we've set in the industry has been very waterfall like, but it doesn't absolutely have to be that way. I think it's partly due to the fact that we are like now starting to interact with the line of business and development teams. Development teams are very used to driving agile methods, while the line of business who does the definition phase might actually not be that familiar with those methods. Might be due to that. I don't know, but I definitely see many successful practitioners start larger end-to-end automations by splitting it into small chunks, deliver the first increment, the second, then continue down the process path and step by step ship pieces of that automation. That's really the successful formula to develop larger pieces of automation.
Yeah, I would think that you would treat bots like other modern software components, check them into Git and merge them into the trunk and test them following modern approaches, A/B testing and canary deployments and things like that, especially because we have this maintenance challenge, right? And if you have software that's inherently dynamic, you're going to want to take that approach, right? You mentioned change management, and change management, I don't know what our audience thinks, but I'm sure some people are rolling their eyes thinking of the ITIL change management processes with the change control boards that took weeks and it was all this politics and everything. And that's not going to, that's just not part of the modern approach to software. But if you think of change management as, as an automated Git approach to dealing with, changes to software, it's a whole different perspective on things. So I'm sort of curious, do you think it's feasible to think of the bots and the rest of the RPA story in this modern sort of Git-centric, continuous deployment context? Is that something that people can strive for, or is the technology just not up to it?
I think the technology is really up to it if you start with that model. Some of the low-code tools definitely won't fall into that pattern because, well, they have been trying to somehow they started with this path of breaking down the software development conventions. Then they are slowly reinventing them, adding version control, these kind of things, and at least to our technology stack, as we are looking to add more low code components into that, we intend to keep the flexibility of being able to convert it at the end of the day to code and be able to work with that as you would otherwise do. So I think that's part of the legacy, is that it started with really this proprietary thing that doesn't conform to a version control system, but then we realized, oh, actually we do need to have this.
Antti, anything to add? Or Sebastian, sorry.
No, I think Antti covered it perfectly.
Very good. So we're just about out of time. So I figure, and we've gone through a lot of the questions. There's a lot more questions, but I think we've gone through some of the key ones, and we've had some great discussion on the chat. I don't know if everybody's checked out the chat. There's been quite a thread going on here. But to sort of wrap up, I figured I'd just sort of open up for some final comments. So Sebastian, any final comments you'd like to make?
No, but I think that I've been saying this for quite many years now, but it feels like we're just getting started on the RPA journey, and kind of even companies that have come quite far on the automation journey are still to realize the vast majority of the potential with RPA in the organization. So I think that there's still a really nice future for RPA. It's going to be super interesting to see kind of where it leads, and we also kind of see different vendors in the space taking different approaches, moving more towards low code, no code type of approaches, and kind of enabling anyone essentially. And then we have kind of the Robocorps that are building more the robustness and kind of what's the actual need. And I think that everything kind of has its place on the market. But it's having started in this industry back in 2012 and kind of seeing everything that's happened up until now. I mean, it's been a hell of a journey to say the least, and I'm really positive that it's going to be we're going to see the same fun development in the market for the next 5 or 6 years as well. So it's really interesting, and I think that we'll see more and more of these kind of end-to-end solutions and kind of how different technologies are kind of creating solutions. And yeah, but if you haven't gotten started on your RPA initiative, then it's about time you do that.
Very good. And Antti, final words.
Yeah, I mean, good point there, Sebastian. It's time to start on that initiative. I think, you know, a lot of people have already started that, but surprisingly, there's only you know, so many who are more than you know, a dozen automations in, and there's a lot of proof out there that it can provide a lot of savings and improvements in many ways. You know, coming back to the thing that I said in the beginning, I think RPA and the ability to be able to deploy bots as digital workers is really a fundamental capability that's here to stay, and we certainly haven't seen all the innovation in this space. It used to be that, you know, a few years ago it seemed that we were seeing a new RPA tool come up every 2 weeks or every week, and last year we saw them being acquired every week, and we are now breaking through this hype cycle of these different acronyms and the hyper automations and what have you there, and starting to realize, well, it's all about bots and how they integrate into different technologies out there, whether that's workflow automation, whether that's low code, and whether that's AI. And that's really good to see starting to happen finally.
Very good. Well, I think we should wrap up here. So thank you very much, Antti and Sebastian. So the Robocorp people will follow up with each of you with a link to the recording. If we didn't get to your question, you can also contact them at contact@robocorp.com. And I'm sure they'll be happy to answer your questions. So again, this is Jason Bloomberg. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.